Om Sahanavavatu Sahanau Punuktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May our studies be fruitful and full of vigor. May they be enlightening and efficient. May we not necessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we're continuing with our study, 18th chapter, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. And we had reached last time the 42nd stanza of this 18th chapter. Just to remind you of the background, this is to do with these particular sections are really to do with how do we get our happiness and how do we get our freedom. And the title of this talk I gave as the something like the necessity, I think, for individuality. All along, you may think that individuality is a bad thing. And we can categorize various societies. It is said that in the Western countries, there is more individual orientation, and in Eastern countries, there's more community orientation. And I think, generally speaking, this is correct. The idea of national freedom, individual freedom, rights, and so on is very much a Western cultural thing and is entrenched in the cultural, political, cultural, social aspect of democracy. But in Eastern countries, the community seems to be the emphasis. And how do you construct a social structure which is for the good of everybody, where nobody suffers from exaggerations in capitalism, where nobody suffers from exaggerations in socialism, where there's a balance in society? Is there such a thing? It seems like a utopia. And yet, in the ancient days, this social system of Varna was not only a social organizational structure, but a divinely orientated structure, as we can see from this chapter. Why should it be so? It is because God creating the universe, if we want to put it like this, would naturally create something that is harmonious. Not necessarily something that we are judged to be good, but something which is harmonious. Very often you hear, why does God make death and suffering and so on? Yes, this is all intrinsically part of so-called life. This is part of an uneven, unrefined thing that we call nature, Prakriti. It is designed to be like that. And if there was no small imbalance, then we would not be here to discuss it. If there was a complete balance, there'd be a complete annihilation. If there was only matter emerging and antimatter emerging, the two would cancel each other out, and we would have nothing. There has to be some kind of asymmetry present in order for us to exist. And so this continuous correction is necessary. This is illustrated in the Vedas as a struggle between Indra and his nemesis, a struggle to move in and move out. This constant struggle is there in the very nature of the cosmos. We should not be surprised, therefore, if it happens in our small world. The only thing is, how do we take it? Now, there are some people who take it with a sense of serenity, a sense of self-restraint, self-control, even-mindedness. Such people are a great example to society, and technically, these are called brahmanas. Shamo tamastapaha shocham shantye arjavam evacha jnanam vijnanam ashtikyam brahma karma svabhavajan. Serenity is a quality, all described as belonging to a section of society a highly evolved section of society known as Brahmanas. And they are born by their own nature, and they are not necessarily born into a family of similar people. And that is the great mistake today. The caste system, this Varna system, is unfortunately taken in a socially discriminative way. So that if you are born in a certain family that is of this particular caste, and then you seek somebody of another caste, and then it has to be the same region, and in these days there has to be a doctor or something like that when marriages are arranged. And this is going to some obscure rule for its own time. Maybe in the antiquities of the laws of Manu, you might find something like that. But this really is to do with the Dharma Shastra, or this is to do with the Shastra, really, not of Dharma, but localized Dharma. That is subjective moral values for its time to suit a particular society in its day, in its time. It is not supposed to be a part of Sanatana Dharma, the eternal law. And so when we mix these up, then we come across a problem. It is, of course, all our ambition to be serene, to be equilibrium, have equilibrium of mind, not to react to anything. But saints are born like that, and for them, Christ's teaching, turn the other cheek, is important. But there is another kind of sage, another kind of rishi. These are the Kshatriya rishi. These are the administrative kinds of sages. So we have on the one side the contemplative sage, and on the other side we have the militant sage. And the idea of turning the other cheek has to be adjudged in the circumstances. So let us see the various qualities, the ideal qualities that make for a Brahmana. That is a pure example to society, someone that has a balancing influence on society. We have a better society when we have these models. When we have a country that is based on people who are self-sacrificing, and there's a universal appeal. I don't know if Nelson Mandela was in any way religious, but his own self-sacrifice, his personal heroism, his even-mindedness, his fair-mindedness, his placid nature ultimately. He wasn't always placid in nature, of course. He was a political revolutionary that used bombs. But he became, in his maturity, somebody who was a peacemaker, somebody who initially was a Kshatriya, and then ultimately became a Brahmin. So it is the character, it is the nature of the character that we are describing that we can truly call a Brahmana. So let us look at these various qualities. Shamaha, serenity. Now, how do we get serenity, and what does serenity mean? Not being upset by anything, being able to handle all the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of life, and making the most of it so that there's no impulsive reaction about it. Any bad news, so-called, that comes to us, he takes it with a non-committal attitude. It takes it with the idea that life provides problems, same life provides solutions, and won't even use the language of problems and challenges, but rather the language of sporting obstacles. That means there has to be some fundamental formula that is developed in the principles of philosophy. And so I see these qualities of serenity, self-restraint, austerity, and so on, as all causal to a point. What is the cause of serenity? Self-restraint, self-control. We all have to cultivate this self-control. And then there's austerity. What is the difference between self-control, that is damas, and tapaha? Self-restraint and austerity, there's a great difference. We saw in the earlier chapters 3 kinds of tapas, austerity. Austerity of body, austerity of speech, austerity of mind. Self-restraint means restraining any urge, any impulsive reaction, formulating a well-organized, a well-planned reaction, going through a certain process, what we might call a 4 or 5 R's, as it were. So the first is the reaction that comes. But now you see the Brahmanas have a habitual reaction which is always serene from their continuous practice of self-restraint. And then it's necessary to reassess or to review and then revalue and then provide a better reaction that will not upset anybody around us or the country or the nation as a whole and the society as a whole. What is the cause of self-restraint? Self-restraint and austerity go hand in hand. Not only will I restrain, but I will make sure that my habit level is reformed by specifically, consciously, deliberately engaging in a practice of austerity. Well, of course, the word austerity is a difficult word. The English word is a difficult word. Because what really is tapas is going with the flow, not resisting. Is it easier to go with the flow if you're swimming in a river or to struggle against the current? And so in order to do this, another prerequisite is there, purity. Purity has to be there. So this shocham, or purity of mind. What is purity? Purity means not having any understanding or attachment to I or the fruits of my activities. Purity and the Brahmana are one and the same. The even tenure of spiritual life of a God-man is bound to be affected once, in a way, at least by the intrusion of worldly people even. So how to handle that? But never affected thereby, always remaining pure, always keeping the mind polished. Another set with a causal relationship, forgiveness. We find in all the lives of the saints this wonderful quality of forgiveness. When people do us some harm, very often we can forgive, but we can't easily forget. But there's no true forgiveness without forgetting. So this forgiveness is necessary. And this calm forgiveness is the way, the thought, word, and deed being ever directed to the welfare of everyone. And Jesus put it this way: don't take the small splinter from another person's eye when there's a whole beam in your own. Rather take the beam out of your own eye first. You have no right to criticize anybody. Nobody's perfect. And so therefore there will be a flaw. And won't you create a sense of forgiveness, understanding that there is a philosophical basis for it, a basis in reality. And so the cause of forgiveness comes up next. Uprightness, that is having a high moral value, having arjavam, that is knowing what is the right thing, not what is the impulsive thing, but having a firm sense of discernment about what is right, what is wrong. That is, what is harmonious and what is not. So this comes from a realization, and that realization we call, after knowledge, we call vijnanam, is realization. Knowledge alone is not sufficient. It has to be taken to vijnana. And that is an understanding, a realization, a one-on-one direct encounter. And a belief. What kind of a belief? There has to be a firm conviction that there is this one stable entity. God alone is real. As long as we feel that the world is real in a permanent sense, then we feel that God is far away and unreal. The sooner and the closer we get to God as reality, the less the world becomes real for ourselves. Any amount of scriptural study, of knowledge, is not the same as God realization, and it avails of nothing. Astikya is more than a formal belief in God. It is a belief in a perpetuation of it, that there is beyond the borders of death this same entity that we call God. A Brahmana holds himself as a pilgrim on earth, not one belonging to it, is the distinction. And so their treasure is not of the mundane, but of the divine. Such people are required for harmonious societies. This life of renunciation, self-dedication, that, for example, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa lived, is the model of the ideal for a Brahmana. Now, these four aspects of society are like Russian dolls. One fits into the other. So a Brahmana will actually have all the duties, not only that we have described, that is, acting as a model, and by virtue of this model, of this example, teaching everyone, not passing on knowledge, not necessarily a pundit, that's the thing, but simply being the model, being the light that radiates everywhere, that people can immediately realize or acknowledge. Like moths coming to a flame, such people will attract others to them. And unfortunately, what we have as an idea of Brahmana today, somebody who is a pundit, somebody who is a scholar, somebody who maybe does some puja or some ritual, somebody who knows the astrological and astronomical positions, somebody who can go into a house, for example, and bless a house with a ritual and so on. Such Brahmins, no doubt, are there. But if it is all on the surface, if it is just to do with ritual and just to do with scriptural maneuvering, then this is not really a Brahmin. And a Brahmin will have inside him the qualities of Brahmin, the qualities of Kshatriya, the qualities of Vaishya and Shudra, all of them. But the next one, that is the Kshatriya, will correspondingly have within him all the duties of the other three varnas or castes. Let's have a look now. So there are a number of qualities, and I should mention before we move on that if we were to summarize in one word, what is a Brahmin? It would be somebody who is balanced and somebody dedicated to balance. If you take all these qualities, you'll see how balancing they are. We can take all the characteristic traits, the best characteristic traits of different types of people and compile them all in one place, and we have the ideal, which we call Brahman. Shauryam tijo dhritiye daksham yudecha pya apalayanam dhanam ishvara bhavat cha kshatram karma svabhavajam. The one who is a kshatriya, and don't forget this beautiful and important statement in both the previous passage and this one, that is svabhavajam, born of their own nature. How do we find what is our own way? What is the duty we should perform? Well, the thing which is easy, natural, and delightful for you, that is the way. And so tapasya, for example, for the Brahmin, is not struggling against. Tapasya for the Brahmin is going easily, in a natural way, gliding along with the divine grace that is flowing. Let us have a look then at these various qualities of Kshatriya. Who is a Kshatriya? We think of a Kshatriya as a military person, but the duty of a Kshatriya is protecting others in a sense of righteousness, not dominating, not exercising their power against citizenry. So let's have a look. Heroism is number one. This great, great prowess, this shauryam, and then tejaha, splendor. Splendor, vigor, strength. So the cause of heroism, the cause of this prowess will be vigor, energy. And the cause of this energy will be strength. What is described here as dhritihi. We've come across the term before. Firmness and resolve. We can say its characteristic is strength. And then daksham, dexterity. What is dexterity? That is resourcefulness. You have to be resourceful and flexible, wise in this way. You have to take what is there in front of you, whatever resources are there, and you have to learn to use them. Same thing in life. In life, we don't have to ask for resources. Resources are there. Whatever is on your plate is a resource, and is a resource for growth. And when we talk about what is our spiritual journey, we can make no distinction between secular and spiritual. So many people ask, see, how can I conduct a spiritual life? I'm so busy. I have so many duties to do. I have this, I have that. No, all your secular duties are in fact your spiritual duties. This is your spiritual path. If you are married, then marriage is your spiritual path. Divorce is not your spiritual path. Marriage is your spiritual path. If you cannot get along with one other person, people used to say that the great, great heroes in spiritual life are really heroines, because for women to live together in a convent, for example, is a very, very difficult thing. I don't know why women are singled out. Men are the same thing, but people collectively living, is it easier? But in marital situations, very few people live together. If you can't get on with one person or two people or three people, then what hope is there for you to get along with the whole of society? So, this resourceful is not, and of course, in Arjun's case, not flying from the battle, not fleeing away, not running away, and the same thing, our duty is there. That is outlined by our inheritance from birth, not our genetic inheritance, but our own inheritance from our own accumulation, our own learning experience from previous lives. And then this wonderful, wonderful quality has to be there. So yute, this is in battle, but and apalayanam, not flying away from our battle, our struggle. Of course, the Kshatriya will view this as a struggle. Don't forget, the Brahmin doesn't view it as a struggle. Then Dhanam, generosity. Dhanam is the key to this. If we were to summarize what their duty therefore would be, is protecting. It is their duty to protect others. It is their duty to do good in the world. And so generosity, a generous spirit. Very often, if we look at the leadership around the world today, who seem to be in this leadership category and need to exhibit their strength, we find sometimes they don't have the generosity. Wherever there's corruption everywhere, you won't find generosity. And it is the corrupt person that is actually classified here as a Shudra. Their nature is like that. And then lordliness, that is, they have to have this certain leadership quality, so that they have to be able to take charge in a situation. And these are the duties. These are born of the Kshatriyas. And they are once more, Svabhavajanam, born of their own nature. All the spirituality evolving souls, or the spiritually evolving souls, require to be processed through this Kshatriya line, through this mold, before they can really aspire to the Brahmanas. It is this Raja Rishi, that is the other kind of Rishi, because turn the other cheek need not necessarily apply to them. Once Swami Vivekananda was asked, what about this Jesus teaching, turn the other cheek? Vivekananda, probably with a twinkle in his eye, thought about it. And he said, yes, that's fine. But the second time, punch him on the nose. All right. You see, there has to be some practicality. It depends. That is not an appropriate teacher for the Brahmana, but definitely an appropriate teacher for the Kshatriya. Again, Kshatriya would operate with generosity. So there will be a self-control still there. But dana, this generosity, is the art really of administration. It's allowing the maximum facilities and prosperity to people. And so there's a kind of parental attitude that goes along with this classification of people, Kshatriya. They should never have any intent of providing other than for the welfare of the public, not exhorting or exerting their energy for private ends. And this whole beautiful phrase, Ishvara Bhava, lordliness, is there, preventing people from lawlessness, guiding them to be law-abiding. So often the police forces around the world are seen to be the enemies of people. And I have to say that it is a great enlightening move for society to bring this community policing in. I know here in Ireland, there's a great section of the Garda Síochána, the police force, who are dedicated to improving relations with the community, protecting them, seen to be protectors, not seen to be punishers, not seen to be people with big restrictive sticks, endorsing and the law with no human understanding. And statistically, where these community efforts have been in those areas, the crime rate has diminished. It's a wonderful, wonderful structure. Going back to these original principles. These are principles thousands of years ago. They understood it. Now, the vast majority of people will fit into the category of Vaishyas. These people are dedicated to wealth creation. We have to understand what is meant in the ancient times. So, Krishi, Goraksha, Vanijam, Vaishya Karma, Swabhavajam, Paricharyatmakam Karma, Shudrasya api Swabhavajam. So this particular stanza is joining two sectors because both of them have the same broad duty, and that is service. The Vaishya has the opportunity to serve the community by providing them with goods and materials for material living. And the Shudra, that is the one who is only capable of physical work, unskilled labor, is also providing a service to all the rest. So the service role is being played by these two aspects of society, and they make up the vast majority. But the Vaishya will make up more, because don't forget, the Kshatriya's generosity as part of the administration. All military people, all administrators will be in this role. Their job is to uplift the people, protect the people and uplift them. That is, give them education. Now, all of these various sectors of society are not stuck in their role. So let us have a look. The first thing that is mentioned here is Krishi, Goroksha, Vanijayam, agriculture. And it specifically mentions cattle rearing and trade. Let's try if we can put this into the modern context. You see, all the wealth in the ancient days was in cattle. It was purely a pastoral agricultural people. And so cattle was the exchange money of the day. The wealth was in that. Agriculture, creating food for the vast populace. And then cattle rearing as a form of wealth, and trade. So in other words, what is commerce, industry, and agriculture? This is the vast majority of people who are occupied in these things, as are today. And so it consists of service. Wealth and material resources are also glories of God. And so there's Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, being the spouse of the Lord. This whole imagery is rich in meaning. We have to understand that life is on the various levels. Physical level is there, the mental level is there, and the energetic level is there, and the spiritual level is there. And all of these have to be catered for, and these are echoed in society's structure. So all craftspeople, all artisans, all job workers, all technicians, all of these people are Vaishyas. The modern practitioners, even such as lawyers, doctors, and so on and so forth, they also fall into the Vaishya aspect. And the dharma, or the duty of these people, is to serve society through their vocation, their calling. They take this as a divine arrangement. We can see if any of this doesn't happen, if somebody is doing somebody else's natural occupation, being born in this means I have a natural tendency toward it, a natural liking toward it. So the preparation and the sale of other things which don't benefit society, let us say for intoxicants, drugs, and so on and so forth, does not fall into the category of Vaishyas because it does not benefit society as a whole. It is against dharma, or establishing a harmonious society with harmonious standards and norms for the welfare of all beings. So again, as I say, the Shudra is he, or the one who can only render some physical labor. They're incapable of setting up a calling of their own, perhaps. So whoever actually in these modern times gets employed as a low-paid subordinate, say, to somebody else, doesn't have their independence, is really part of this category of Shudra, because they're dependent on other people for their livelihood. The Vaishya has an independence about them. And so this really is the labor class. And people who come under this classification are these Shudra. All of these paid people, not all of them, of course, are Shudras. For example, teachers, school teachers, we might say other people who are dedicated principally to teaching and principally to doing a service for others, such as in charitable work and so on and so forth. What category do you think they might be in? Brahmana, isn't it? Having all the qualities of that. But a government officer, for example, would be naturally a Kshatriya. And all the rank and file in any defense force or police force would be Kshatriyas. And people who sell their labor in independence, and those who take bribes and tips, we can put into the classification, unfortunately, of Shudras because they are dependent. It is this dependency and codependency in society which really is an area of society that society itself has to deal with. And the Shudra has an opportunity to raise himself up. Let's take an example. For example, we are dealing with the COVID situation at the moment. But sometimes we forget that in the 14th century, roughly two-thirds of the European population was wiped out with bubonic plague, something carried by rats. And we might think this is a great disaster, but the whole social structure changed as a result, because those people who were forced into the unskilled labor position, who never had any land of their own, and particularly here in Ireland, historically, if you're a Roman Catholic, if you're Catholic, and therefore native of Ireland, then you had no right to land ownership. So that happened in many different places, as serfdom. And what happened? Many of these occupations, overlords and so on and so forth, disappeared with the plague. and opened up the opportunity for a merchant class to come out, the Vaishyas to come out. And they then had rights because they became extremely vital to society. They could no longer be dominated by a protecting Kshatriya class, who obviously in this context were not really Kshatriyas because they didn't necessarily have the qualities of the Kshatriya unless they were protective people. These 4 grades, social grades in society, are all based on the quality of the mind. And in all societies and countries, these natural classifications can be found. And among 4 brothers in a family, it's possible to find all these 4 varnas. It's also possible to find a group or a clan or a tribe or even a country where one of these dominate. And I mentioned last week, in a political society, we might find one class dominating. For example, where socialism is the norm, where governments have socialist parties ruling or reigning, or socialist ideals, socialism to communism, then the Shudra class is dominating. And where we have military dictatorships, you can see the norm. Where you have maybe a society engrossed in capitalism, then you might have the Vaishyas dominating, those kinds of people. All is fine as long as these moral precepts are kept in place, and only will that be kept in place with selflessness, looking at the overall good of society as such. We can see these coming out in the various approaches that we call yogas as well. So, for example, we find karma yoga suited to the Shudra. We find that the Vaishya may be suited to more the meditation, the bhakti yoga, to the Kshatriya because of their need for generosity. And we might find, of course, the Brahmanas suited to Jnana Yoga, the mind. So just to make sure that we understand and that we are able to promote in a realistic way in our own societies some kind of close ideal that will benefit everybody, we can tell our own politicians about this, that it's just like a human body. In a human body, you require the head, you require the hands and feet, and you require the heart. So the head, the Brahmanas, you might say the heart, the Kshatriyas, you might say that the Vaishyas will provide the food section, the abdomen, and the hands and feet, the Shudras. All of these are necessary. You have one sector missing, the whole thing collapses. Now, the most important thing about saying all of these things is really the next stanza. Sre Sre Karmani Abhirataha Samshitim Labate Naraha Swakarma Nirataha Sitim Yata Vindati Tach Chrano. Devoted, this is Sre Sre, in his own karmani, duty, devoted each to his own duty, we attain the highest perfection. This is the way. How engaged in his duty, how much he is engaged in his duty, to that extent he attains this perfection. Whatever station in life you have. Now there is a wonderful story taken from the Mahabharata, and Swami Vivekananda, when he gives a series of talks on the subject of karma yoga, in his chapter he asks a question, and that's the title of the chapter itself: what is duty? Because it's important to understand what is my duty if I'm going to do it. So he gives this example, and in this example shows us very clearly the simplicity of this way to perfection. Now the story, as I say, taken from the Mahabharata. There was a yogi who had practiced for many years, and he was sitting under a tree. And as he was sitting, a crow and a crane had some kind of fight and disturbed his meditation, deposited things on him and so on. And he became angry and looked at them, and his anger and the look of his anger burnt these two birds to a cinder. And he thought, oh, what great power I have. I didn't realize this power of concentration has borne fruit in this way. And so, as is the custom, he went to beg his food, and he knocked on a door. A lady opened the door, and she said, yes, I'll come to you now. Please wait. And what she was doing, of course, she was going and feeding and looking after her husband. But what he thought, he never said, he thought, does this woman not know who I am? Does she not know what a great yogi I am? Does she not know my power of concentration? And without him saying a word, she says from the inside, says, well, I don't know much about your yoga, but my boy, in here at this house, there's no crow and there's no crane. And he was absolutely astonished. So he was intrigued. How did this woman know about this episode of the crow and the crane? She says, you wait there. I'll be with you now. So he waited, still puzzled. And then in his astonishment, at last, of course, the woman came back. He fell at her feet immediately and said, Mother, how did you know about this crow and this crane? And she said, my boy, I don't know about your yoga and all your yoga practices and all that. I'm a common everyday woman. I made you wait because my husband was ill. And I was nursing him and feeding him and so on. And all my life I have struggled to do my duty as a wife. When I was unmarried, I did my duty to my own parents. Now that I am married, I do my duty to my husband. That is all the yoga I practice. So our duty, what is called our swadharma, our individual duty, actually changes according to our ashram in life, according to our growth. A student's duty will be different. And as you grow up and as you go advance in life, your duty shifts. It's not a fixed thing. But by doing my duty, she says, I have become illumined. And thus I could read your thoughts and know what you had done in the forest. And if you want to know something higher than this, then you have to go to the market and you go to such and such a town, you go off there, and then there's a man there, you'll find a Vyata. Now this whole episode and the teaching of the Vyata is known as Vyata Gita in the Mahabharata. So he goes there and she says, he will tell you something that you will be very glad to learn, more than me. And so the sannyasa thought, why should I go to that town and go to that Vyata? Because, of course, a Vyata was the lowest in society, dedicated to butchering meat and killing animals and all the rest of it, and carving it up, a butcher. And nobody wanted to touch that person. There's a beautiful description given, we can imagine it. Anyway, he came near the town, he found that market that was mentioned and saw at a distance a big fat Vyata. You can imagine him, no shirt, just a dhoti covered with blood, sweating, a repulsive looking person, and with big knives and all the rest of it. And he was talking and he was bargaining with other people who were there. And the young man said to him, oh, Lord help me. Is this the man from whom I'm going to learn? He's the incarnation of a demon. If he is anything, So in the meantime, this man looked up and said, "Oh, Swami, did that lady send you here? Please take a seat until I've done all my business." And the sannyasin thought, "I wonder why I'm here. I wonder what use will it be here?" Anyway, he took his seat, and the man went on with his work. And after he had finished, he took his money and said to the sannyasin, "Come, sir, come to my home." And on reaching the home, the Vyata gave him a seat nicely and said, "Wait here." And he went into the house. Now, what he did in the house was he washed his old father and mother, he fed them, and he did everything he could to please them as a priority. And after that, he came back to the sannyasa and said, "Now, sir, you have come here to see me. What can I do for you?" And the sannyasin asked him a few questions about soul, about God, and all the rest of it. And the Vyata gave him a lecture, and that lecture forms now a part of this Mahabharata, which is called Vyata Gita. And this Gita contains one of the highest flights of the Vedanta. And so that when the Vyata had finished his teaching, again the sannyasin was astonished. And the sannyasin said, "Why are you in this body? You're so wise. You have so much knowledge, and yours is just the role of Vyata and Vyata's body, and doing all this filthy, ugly work." "My son," replied the Vyata, "no duty is ugly. No duty is impure. My birth placed me in these circumstances and environment. Faith in God. In my boyhood, I learned the trade. I am unattached, and I try to do my duty well." We have to be careful about this word, unattached. There are people who aspire for this and are not there. "So I try to do my duty well." How do you get this detachment? By doing your duty, by diving into your duty and doing your duty as a divine action, as a worship. All work then becomes worship. So any part of your activities, anything that is landing on your plate in front of you, right here, right now, is your duty. Imagine that God has given it to you with his open hands. "Here, my child, please do this for me." We won't shirk our duty. And so he says, "I try to do my duty as a householder, and I try to do all I can to make my father and mother happy. I neither know your yoga, nor have I become a sannyasin, nor did I go out of the world into a forest. Nevertheless, all that you have heard and seen has come to me through this process, this unattached attitude toward my duty, doing the duty which belongs to my position." Then Vivekananda goes on like this. He says, "There is a sage in India, a great yogi, one of the most wonderful men I have ever seen in my life. He is a peculiar man. He will not teach anyone. If you ask him a question, he won't answer. It's too much for him to take up the position of a teacher. He will not do it. And if you ask a question and wait for some days, in the course of conversation, he will bring up the subject, and wonderful light will be thrown on it. He told me once the secret of work, and it runs like this. Let the end and the means be joined into one. When you are doing any work, do not think of anything beyond. Do it as a worship. Devote your whole life to it for the time being. Thus, he says, in the story, the Vyata and the woman did their duty with cheerfulness and wholeheartedness, not begrudging anything. And the result was that they became illumined, clearly showing that the right performance of the duties of any station in life without attachment to results leads to us, leads us to the highest realization of the perfection of the soul. Then he concludes with this chapter, what is duty? It is the worker who is attached to results that grumbles about the nature of the duty. You find very often people grumbling. We need increased wages. We need this, we need that. In this society and this approach, no such dissatisfaction comes. The duty which has fallen to his lot, to the unattached worker, all duties are equally good and form efficient instruments with which selfishness and sensuality may be killed and the freedom of the soul secured. We are all apt to think too highly of ourselves. Other duties are determined by our deserts to a much larger extent than we are willing to grant. We are the authors of our own work, our own environment, our own activities that land on our plate and in our environment. Competition rouses envy and it kills the kindness of the heart. To the grumbler, the complainer, all duties are distasteful. Nothing will ever satisfy him, and his whole life is doomed to prove a failure. So now he says at the end, let us work on, doing as we go, whatever happens to be our duty, and being ever ready to put our shoulders to the wheel. Then surely shall we have, or shall we see, the light. Don't think you'll ever be unemployed, because God's grace will always flow to you and provide you with the raw materials for you to get your freedom and perfection by doing your duty. I had a conversation today with a devotee, and you can see in the history of this devotee, they have tried to be spiritual. What does that mean? They tried all kinds of techniques from everywhere, from New Age techniques to breathing techniques to all kinds of things. And I had to point out, please, why don't you strip away all this complexity? Why don't you get down to a simple life? You have a job to do, you have a living to earn, you have responsibilities to fulfill. Whatever is there in front of you, take it as your raw material for spiritual life. There is no division whatsoever between spiritual life and secular life. There is a wonderful story of a person who was feeling that there was something inauspicious about his circumstances, his house. So he left it and he went and he settled in another village. And that in turn seemed dirty to him, and he went to the forest. Now, of course, we all go to the forest and think everything is nice. But there he sat under a mango tree and birds' droppings fell on his head. So he said, this forest is very unfriendly. And he went and stood in a river. But in the river, the sight of the big fish eating up the small fish filled him with disgust. And so the whole of creation, he concluded, is like this. It's filthy and it's unkind. There's no way out except through death. So he got out of the water. He kindled a fire. The idea, he'd sit on the fire, do away with everything. But then a gentleman was passing and said, my brother, why are you preparing to die? And he said, because the whole world is inauspicious. The man said, if this unclean body of yours, this mass of flesh begins to burn, I just live down the road, it's going to stink. I live close by. Even if you burn a hair, we can smell it. Where could I go? When a single hair burns, it smells so awful. Now all this flesh of yours is going to burn. Just think a little of the stench you're going to spread in the whole area. And then the man was bewildered and exclaimed, if one can neither live in this world nor die in it, what can we do? So that is to say, If we go about condemning everything as bad and inauspicious and rejecting it, we simply can't carry on. If you try to avoid small actions, then other great big actions will come and sit on your head. It's in the nature of action that we do not get rid of it by giving up its external form. If somebody spends his energies on resisting the actions which come to him naturally with the current, it's like swimming against the current and struggling rather than gliding along with it and accepting. So there's a great, great lesson about devoting all our energies in a spiritual way to our duty. And the Lord makes it very clear, this siddhim, this perfection that we are seeking, equivalent to happiness, fulfillment, is accomplished, is gotten by doing one's own duty, not by picking up the duty of another one. No work is ugly to the sadhaka or spiritual practice. Any and every work becomes worship when the attitude, of course, is soundly based. And the next stanza will explain. And we have time just to do one more stanza here. Yataha pravritye bhutanam yenam sarvam idam tatam swakarmana tam abhyarchya siddhim vindati manavaha. So it begins, from whom? Yataha. There's a very curious word used, pravritihi, the evolution. From he, from whom, is the evolution. Pravritihi, the manifestation, the pushing forward. It has a number of different terms in Sanskrit, but in this context it means the evolution, the projection, the manifestation of all beings comes from one origin, by whom all this is pervaded. Worshipping him with his own duty, man attains perfection. He reiterates it. What a beautiful statement. Let's explore this a little bit. See, the common notion, as we said, is that the worship of God is one thing and discharging our worldly duty is another. This is completely wrong. This whole question of evolution is beautifully conceived of in this philosophy. In other philosophies, the word creation is used, or the concept of creation is used, that there is something ex nihilo, made from nothing. But from nothing comes nothing. You can't get something from nothing. Even a child will understand this. And yet, there are great theologies which champion this idea of ex nihilo, something from nothing. And modern physics has taken up the same thing. The creation event called the Big Bang has come from a singularity, and that seems to have come from nothing. Realizing the absurdity of it, other theories to do with it have come about. And instead of saying nothing, they say nothing important. It's just a singularity. Please explain what that is. You can't do it. You can't do it because it's beyond a border of an event horizon, and we don't know what happens beyond that. There's nothing that we know of there. So these concepts are similar, but there is something, not nothing. And it is one entity that religion calls God, or we call a supreme entity, supreme being. It is from that this evolution comes, which means that that same one is pervading it. You can't have something separate from it. God made the world and walked away and went on holiday. No. Made the world from himself itself. Earlier we did a guided meditation, and that guided meditation was around a very famous stanza or series of stanzas, a very famous passage. And that describes, there are two passages that would describe it in the Vedas, but it describes the whole of the cosmos as one body, as one single entity. Just like we have hands and head and so on, this entity also has, but of course, many hands, many eyes, many heads, everywhere. We saw this particularly in the 11th chapter of this Bhagavad Gita that we studied earlier. Hands and eyes everywhere. The whole cosmos we have to visualize. When we look at the blue sky, we should imagine this is the infinite skin of the Lord. When we look at the night sky, and tonight, if you're careful, in our region anyway, you may see what is called the Mars opposition, where Mars is closest to the Earth and stands out. I think it's around about 10:30, 11:30. It'll happen.
It's been very visible, yeah. The
Yeah.
last 2 weeks.
Okay. So tonight, I think, if it's not cloudy, would be particularly impressive. The 13th, so they say. And of course, today is Mars Day, so Tuesday, where we call Mardi in French. So this whole universe we have to understand as part and parcel of one cosmic being that not only unfolds. What is the principle of evolution? The principle of evolution, we can have two attitudes toward it. We have the idea of pervading. That means inferring a totality, in which case there can be no evolution, but it looks like an evolution. So we have to see that within the understanding of time, that entity looks as if it's evolving, but when you look at the sum totality, nothing is evolving. So with a twinkle in my eye, I might enter into this argument of evolution versus creation and say, I don't believe in evolution or creation. I don't believe in creation because I don't believe in something from nothing. And I don't believe in evolution because I believe in a totality. So something that doesn't change and has no moving parts, some totality, we can't really understand. We can only understand the product of it through our limited instrumentation. And so we label something as evolution. But what's the implication? Charles Darwin, as I often point out, in his Origin of the Species, hardly mentions the word evolution. He calls it descent by modification. And it's because I think he understands the trap. Supposing I take a piece of paper and supposing it's folded up like this and I give it to you, then you will simply unfold it, but no new paper arises. We never created the paper. We simply unfolded what was already there. And that is the same principle. A seed evolves into a tree. Something unfolding. Evolution means the thing that unfolds. So something unfolds. And what is it that unfolds? It is that same one from whom this unfolding principle comes from. It is that one single entity. And it is there. It is the evolution of so many different, seemingly different beings. It comes from this one source. What a beautiful idea. And therefore that source pervades it, enters into it, as it were, projects it and enters into it. So therefore, we should worship. Doesn't that stimulate a spirit of worship? Worshipping that one. How will we do it? Through our own duty, through doing what we have on our plate. This is the way. So do your duty, and in this way, siddhim, this vindati, manavaha, man, vindati attains siddhim, perfection. We leave that off there, and we will start next week on the 47th stanza of this Moksha Sannyas Yoga. And this goes on with the theme of our own dharma and our individuality and the importance of our individuality in performing our own individual duty. So something that we can practically take away from tonight is approach all your daily duties, all the things that are in your plate, in the domestic area, in the occupational area, work area, in your study area, whatever you're doing, whatever activity you're doing, even in your relaxation area. So do all of these things and approach them with a fresh and different attitude, that all of these are opportunities to you, given time, to worship that source from which we come and which pervades all these things. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.